My son's wife looked her parents in the eye, then pointed at me and laughed. "She's just our maid." The room erupted in chuckles, crystal glasses clinking while I stood frozen, holding a wine bottle like a prop in someone else's play. Not one person, not even my own son, called me by my real name. Not mom, not mother, just silence. So the next morning, I handed her every key I had: front door, back door, garage, mailbox, and said calm as stone, "Good luck paying the mortgage now." In that moment, I wasn't angry. I was done. And that's when everything began to unravel. I'm about to share something close to my heart. But before I do, can you say hi in the comments or tell me where you're from? I love hearing how far my story reached. It's always good to know I'm not alone in this. Thank you. And now, let me tell you everything. If you find comfort or strength in stories like mine, please consider subscribing to this channel. It means more than you know. My name is Clara Whitmore, and this is my story. Chapter 1: The Dinner That Defined Me as the Maid. The night it happened, the house glowed the way I always dreamed it would. A long table stretched across the dining room I had saved my entire life to buy. White linen smoothed flat candles, flickering, steady jazz, humming low from the speaker in the corner. I had roasted the chicken myself, rubbed with herbs that lingered in the air as I poured wine into glasses, so polished they caught the light like crystal prisms. The chairs were filled not with warmth, but with judgment. Vanessa's parents in their tailored clothes, speaking in clipped tones, inspecting every corner of the home as if they owned it. I hovered near the table, adjusting a vase of flowers when the question came, simple, sharp. Her mother tilted her head and asked, "And you are?" The pause should have belonged to Orion, my son, to step in and say, "That's my mother." But he didn't. Vanessa's voice sliced through, instead bright and mocking. "That's Clara, our unpaid maid. Keeps the place running." The words cracked like glass. Laughter erupted, clinking of forks against china, even Orion letting out a short laugh as though it cost him nothing to betray me. I stood there holding an empty wine bottle like a prop I didn't know how to put down. My chest felt hollow, the room spinning in slow motion, but my face stayed still. I set the bottle on the counter, nodded once, and excused myself with the kind of quiet that carries more weight than shouting. In the kitchen, I pressed my hand around the neck of the bottle, fingers tight, knuckles pale. I turned toward the old wooden door I had painted decades earlier with my own hands when the house was still mine in every sense of the word. I remembered the day the paint dried, how Orion had toddled through the hallway, his small palm smudged with blue. Now that same boy sat in the next room pretending I was invisible. I didn't cry. I sat in the chair by the counter, back straight, eyes sharp, feeling a new stillness settle in me. Not grief, not rage, something colder, clearer. The kind of clarity that doesn't announce itself, but waits like a shadow. And in that clarity, a question echoed, if my own son would not call me mother, then who was I inside these walls I had built? The silence answered back. I was no one. And that was the night I decided I would not remain there. The morning light streamed through the thin curtains, cutting across the hardwood floors in sharp stripes. Dust floated in the beams, as if the house itself was exhaling. I stood in the kitchen in the same spot I had left the night before, pouring myself a cup of black coffee. Bitter, strong, grounding. The smell steadied my hands as I waited. I heard her first. Vanessa descending the stairs in her yoga pants phone, glued to her hand screen, glowing with endless notifications. She barely glanced at me, scrolling, smirking at something on the feed. I held the ring of keys in my palm, their weight pressing into my skin front door, back door, garage, mailbox. Every door I had once unlocked for my family, every threshold I had guarded. When she finally looked up, her brow creased as if I was interrupting her morning. I stepped forward, placed the keys in her hand, and said calmly, "Good luck paying the mortgage now." The words dropped between us like stone. She blinked, lips parting, as if she had misheard me. I didn't wait for a reply. I walked past the wall of photographs I had framed myself, the childhood birthdays, graduations, holidays that had cost me pieces of my body, my time, my savings. Each frame had been hung straight by my hands, yet none of those memories had bought me respect. I let my fingertips brush the edge of one wooden frame, then withdrew. Those walls no longer belonged to me. With nothing more than my old coat draped over my arm and a single bag slung across my shoulder, I stepped through the door. No jewelry, no heirlooms, no keepsakes, just myself pared down to the essentials. I didn't slam the door. I closed it gently with finality. On the driveway, I paused for a moment, breathing in the Georgia air, the same air I had once believed carried the promise of family. Behind me, the house loomed solid yet fragile, a monument built on my credit, my down payment, my sacrifices. But it wasn't mine anymore. As I drove toward Asheville, toward the small apartment my Aunt Ruth had left me years ago, I replayed Vanessa's face in my mind, the confusion, as the keys pressed into her palm. She thought she owned the future. What she didn't know was that the deed was still in my name. Every refinancing attempt she had made without me had been denied. Every conversation about transferring ownership had been stalled by me with polite excuses. She had no ground beneath her manicured feet. The apartment greeted me with creaking floorboards and the musty scent of old wood. The heater groaned as though it had lived 100 winters. The wallpaper was yellowed, peeling at the corners. But when I set my bag down and sat in the worn chair, I felt something I hadn't in years, stillness that wasn't heavy with duty. I breathed it in deep, steady, not rage, not grief, just the clarity of knowing I was free. Above me, a cabinet door stuck halfway open, swollen from time. I made a note to check it later. On the desk sat an old box of pens and a spiral notebook left behind from years of buying school supplies for Orion. I opened it, let my hand trace the first page, and knew this would become my ledger of truth, my words, my plans, my future. For the first time in decades, I wasn't the maid. I wasn't the caretaker. I wasn't the invisible woman holding everyone else together. I was Clara Whitmore, and I had just taken my life back with nothing more than a ring of keys and the courage to let go. The light bulb above the old hallway cabinet had gone out days ago, and I had kept forgetting to replace it. That night, I finally climbed the stepladder, the new bulb in one hand and my other gripping the dusty wood frame for balance. As the warm, yellow light flickered on, I caught sight of something pushed deep in the shadows above flat and rust-colored tucked behind a stack of wool blankets. A trunk. It was Aunt Ruth's. I hadn't seen it since I was a teenager. The lock was old and rusted, but it gave way with a little force and a groan of protest. Dust stirred up into the air, catching in the shaft of light like tiny ghosts. Inside were stacks of yellowed papers, envelopes, notebooks, and one sealed letter with my name on the front, written in Aunt Ruth's careful script. The envelope read, "If you are reading this, it means you've come back." I sat down on the floor, back against the wall, the trunk open like a portal between lives. I opened the letter first. She had written it decades ago, 27 years to be exact. She wrote about a moment in the hospital the night I gave birth, how a nurse looked uneasy, how another baby had been wheeled in from a different room just for a moment. She wrote about the confusion of room numbers, swapped bassinets, how she'd seen the tags switched but thought it was just temporary. Her letter ended with something that made my skin crawl. I asked too many questions. I was told to let it go. A week later, a man from the hospital's administration came by with a generous donation to my church and a non-disclosure form I refused to sign. I pulled out a manila folder marked Memorial General, Maternity 1996. Inside were photocopies of 2 hospital birth records, 2 babies born within minutes of each other, different mothers but in the same wing. There were scribbled notes in Aunt Ruth's handwriting, a photocopy of a receipt that appeared to be some kind of settlement payment from the hospital to another family, and a blurry photo of a newborn wrapped in a generic hospital blanket with a foot tag just barely visible. There was another photo, a newspaper clipping. Jameson and Clara Rourke welcomed their son Cassian. The date matched. The hospital matched. My breath stopped when I saw the face. It was Orion's birthday down to the minute. But that wasn't Orion. It was Cassian. I read through everything again, then again. My hands trembled, but my mind was still. This wasn't some cinematic tragedy. It was a code, a pattern finally unraveling. Orion, the boy I raised, was not born from me. Cassian Rourke was, and he had grown up just a few hours away in Charleston. There was a flyer tucked beneath the documents from a small bookstore called Rourke's Books. Scribbled on it in red ink, "He works here. Go gently." I gathered everything, labeled each document, noted dates, doctor names, nurse shifts, file numbers. I created 2 notebooks, one for the emotional record, every thought, every piece of grief or anger I might later forget, and one for strategy. I pulled out a map, marked the route to Charleston, circled the bookstore. I made a promise to myself that I would not rush this. No confrontation, just quiet observation, verification. In Aunt Ruth's notes was a postscript. "If he's anything like you, he'll love mint tea and the smell of old paper." The trunk also held a small key taped to a receipt. I didn't know what it unlocked yet, but I kept it close. I stayed on the floor until my knees ached. The world hadn't turned upside down. It had simply shifted, revealing its true face. And for the first time in decades, I wasn't lost. I had a direction. At night, the apartment creaked with the sounds of age-wood settling pipes, clicking the faint hum of wind against old windows. I didn't mind. The quiet gave me room to think. By the dim glow of the desk lamp, I opened my notebooks. One on the left, one on the right. On the left, I wrote freely, my pain, my questions, my memories. On the right, I drafted steps, strategy, records names. I opened my old laptop. It took a minute to warm up, but it still worked. I started by searching Orion. His LinkedIn hadn't been updated in over 6 months. His old position as a corporate finance manager had vanished. His name had been removed from the company's site. I found his new Venturia sleek website promising real estate opportunities, but the details were vague. There were no client testimonials, just stock photos and jargon. Credit record databases revealed missed payments. Vanessa's name was tied to several high-limit cards, all approaching default, and yet her social media painted a different picture: weekend getaways, designer, bag spa visits. They were living a lie on a foundation of my money, my mortgage. I switched tabs and searched Rourke's Books. The website was modest photos of tall wooden shelves, handwritten staff pics, local events. I clicked to the About Us page. There he was, Cassian Rourke. Dark hair, square jaw, a softness in his eyes that stopped me cold. He looked like someone I knew, but not like Orion. No. He looked like the face I used to see in the mirror when I was young. I copied the address and closed the laptop. The next afternoon, I drove down to Charleston. It was warm for the season. I parked across the street and waited, hands tucked into the sleeves of my coat. The store was quiet, the windows reflecting golden light. Cassian stepped out holding a stack of books and passed them to a waiting customer with a smile. His voice carried across the street, calm, kind, measured. He walked back inside and disappeared behind the shelves. I sat on a bench and cried. Not loud, not messy, just tears slipping down soft and slow like the rain that starts without warning. He was right there, but I couldn't walk in. Not yet. I had no place in his story, not until I knew more, not until I earned the right to say anything. I looked down at my notebook, wrote his name, underlined it once. Later that evening, back in Asheville, I watched the shadows shift on the walls of the apartment and thought of 2 lives, mine brittle and small, carried alone for decades. and his shaped by strangers who were never meant to raise him. The question wasn't what I would do next. It was how I would protect the truth until the moment I chose to share it. I never liked law offices, but this one in Charleston was different. Quiet, wood-paneled, the smell of old books and coffee instead of disinfectant. The lawyer's name was Meredith Crane. She looked me in the eye firm but not cold and let me talk without interruption. I laid out the deed first, my name alone, no co-signers, no trusts. No clauses. Meredith flipped through the paperwork with a practiced hand and gave a small nod before she spoke. This property is yours. If you choose to list it tomorrow, there's nothing they can do to stop it. She tapped the final page, her ring clicking against the table. You've been more than generous. That night, back at the apartment, I sat at my kitchen table with pages spread out like a battlefield map. I pulled up everything I could on Vanessa Ascends. I needed real proof that her empire was built on smoke, that her threats had no foundation. A friend of Meredith's, Darren, was a private investigator with a specialty in digital fraud. We met the next morning over coffee. He wore a wrinkled blazer and had a calm, unshakable presence. When he spoke, it was with the same clarity I had always longed to find in my own voice. 3 days later, Darren delivered a dossier the size of a novella. Fake contracts, placeholder websites, no registered taxes for 2 fiscal years, addresses that traced back to UPS boxes, testimonies from supposed clients that were stock photo models with AI-generated bios. Vanessa Ascends was nothing but vapor. I printed copies, slid them into crisp white envelopes, and labeled each one the same way everything you think you know is a performance. Then I mailed one to her parents. They were the ones who had smiled with tight performative politeness at every dinner, who asked me to keep it simple with my outfits so I wouldn't embarrass them at galas. They were the ones who once whispered loud enough for me to hear, "She's more maid than mother." Let them read what their daughter had built her throne on paper and lies. 2 days passed. Vanessa's Instagram went dark. Comments on her recent post about scaling new heights had vanished. Then her mother, Patricia, the woman who once handed me a broom and said, "Might as well make yourself useful," posted a cryptic update. What's done in the dark always finds its way to the light. I didn't smile. Not yet. I marked the moment in my notebook. I wrote Phase 1 exposure, result collapse underway. I sat in the kitchen and reread Meredith's words. 1 listing. That's all it takes. She was right, and I wasn't done. Not yet. I had expected the knock. Not that night, maybe, but soon. It was after 10 p.m. Rain clung to the windows like a second skin, the kind of wet that seeps into your bones, even with the heater on. I looked through the peephole. Orion. His hair was soaked, sticking to his forehead. His jacket hung limp on his frame. He looked nothing like the man Vanessa tried to sculpt him into. I opened the door. Not wide. Just enough. He didn't ask to come in. He just looked at me with a strange mix of urgency and defeat. "Mom," he said, voice shaking, "can we talk? Vanessa thinks maybe we can find a way. Maybe we don't have to fight. Maybe we can negotiate. As if he still didn't understand. As if he believed we were standing on equal footing. I stepped aside and let him in. He sat at the table. I made no tea. I placed no hand on his shoulder. I simply went to the drawer, pulled out the envelope marked in red ink, and placed it in front of him. Red. He hesitated. "Please?" His fingers trembled as he opened the flap, pulled out the documents, the hospital records, the photo, Aunt Ruth's letter, silence. He scanned, rescanned. His eyes grew wide, then hollow. His lips moved but made no sound. Finally, he looked at me. His voice cracked. I always felt it, like there was a wall between us, like I didn't belong to you. I thought it was me. I kept my voice even. It wasn't. You didn't imagine it. That wall was real, because you are not my son. He flinched as if struck. A long, pained breath escaped his chest. "I don't know who I am," he whispered. And then the breakdown. The kind you don't see on camera, the kind no social post ever captures. He slumped in the chair like a child covering his face, weeping from the center of something broken long ago. I didn't touch him. I didn't speak. I let him feel the weight of truth. Let him mourn the version of his life he had clung to without question. Outside, the rain picked up, slapping against the windows in steady bursts. I tried, he said eventually, quieter. I tried to be someone. But nothing ever fit. Nothing felt real. I sat across from him, the space between us thick with years and silence. I believe you, I said, but believing doesn't change the facts. He nodded slowly. The storm inside him and around him wasn't over, but it had begun to crack. Later, when he left, he didn't say goodbye, just stepped out into the rain and walked down the sidewalk until his shadow vanished. I stood at the door, hand resting on the file he had left behind. The truth was no longer mine alone, and everything from this point forward would depend on what he chose to do next. The sky over Charleston softened to amber as I stood in front of the glass door. The sign read, Rourke's Books, in faded gold leaf, the same as it had when I first found the article tucked in Ruth's chest. Dust danced like quiet spirits in the light that spilled through the windows. The bell above the door chimed gently when I stepped in. Cassian stood behind the counter. He looked up and offered a polite smile, the kind you give to someone who's walked in before but whose name you don't quite remember. Afternoon, he said. Let me know if I can help you find anything. I nodded. I'm not looking for a book. I'm looking for a quiet conversation. Would that be all right? He hesitated just briefly before stepping around the counter. We've got a break room in the back, he offered. We keep tea back there if you're interested. I followed him through a narrow hallway lined with stacked inventory and handwritten notes tacked to the walls. The room was small with a wobbly wooden table, mismatched chairs, and a kettle already hissing on a portable stove. He reached for a tin without asking and pulled out 2 bags of peppermint tea. Hope you don't mind, he said. I always brew this in the afternoons. I didn't reply at first. My hands trembled just a little as I pulled the manila envelope from my bag. It had been sealed for decades, unopened truths waiting for the right moment. I placed it gently on the table between us. This, I said, is about you. And about me. Cassian watched me carefully, but didn't touch the envelope. I don't understand. I nodded slowly. You were born at St. Ethel's Hospital in Asheville, late July. Same hour as another child, Orion. There was a switch. Intentional or not, I raised the wrong child. You grew up with someone else's name, and I lost mine without ever knowing it. He said nothing for a long moment. His fingers finally reached forward, opening the flap, sliding out the documents. The duplicate birth charts, Ruth's handwritten notes, the compensation letter from the hospital, the photograph of a bundled infant, his nose unmistakably mine. He read everything in silence. When he looked up, there was no anger, only confusion, pain. I love my parents, he said, almost apologetically. I always have, but there's always been this emptiness, like a missing word in a sentence you can't quite finish. I took a long breath. I'm not here to take anything from you. I'm not asking you to leave them. I don't need you to call me Mom. I just thought you deserved the truth. His hand stayed on the papers, lightly brushing the edge as though they might disappear. Why now, he asked. Because I've spent 56 years being invisible to the people I loved, I said. And I don't want to be invisible anymore. He looked down, then back at me. So, what happens next? I shook my head. That's not mine to answer. You choose. I'll respect whatever it is. Outside, the sun slipped lower, stretching golden shadows across the room. He poured another cup of tea this time without asking and slid it toward me. I reached for the cup with both hands, steadier now than I had been in years. The house in Savannah sold in under 5 days. The listing agent called with a voice full of surprise, and I told her to keep the details short. I didn't want a story. I wanted a clean line under a very long sentence. I didn't watch the furniture leave. I didn't supervise the moving truck. I just stood across the street, arms crossed, as Orion and Vanessa loaded the last of their curated life into cardboard and plastic bins. She looked different, drawn, but still tried to keep her posture upright, even as her mother's voice carried over from the car. "You humiliated us," Patricia shouted loud enough to make the neighbors peek through curtains. "How dare you lie about your company, your success, everything? And we defended you." Vanessa turned, said nothing, then got in the car. Her father slammed the door without a word. That night, I signed the closing papers with steady hands. The pen didn't shake. Orion texted me 2 words, "We lost." I didn't reply. I was already gone. The next week, Cassian called. "We did some renovations at the store," he said. "I want you to see something." I arrived in the late afternoon. The air smelled like old paper and varnish. He led me through the store again, past the break room, to a hallway I hadn't noticed before. There was a new door at the end. Fresh wood, hand-stenciled letters. He took a key from his pocket and placed it in my palm. It was old-fashioned bronze, smooth from use. "This room is yours," he said. "To read, to write, to breathe. For however long you want it." I turned the key. Inside the walls were lined with untouched shelves, warm wood, fresh polish. A wide armchair sat near the window next to a small round table where a cup of peppermint tea steamed already poured. Sunlight poured in from the skylight above, turning the room gold. It didn't feel like a gift. It felt like a return. I stepped in, closed the door behind me, and sat. From my bag, I pulled my journal and wrote the final sentence of the page. I once gave away keys to people who left me locked out. But today, I hold the key to my own beginning. Then I looked around at the room, the light, the silence, and I stayed.